and welcome to Awakening Through Love, the podcast. My name's Rod Gordon.
And my name's Martina Hughes. So, today we have a topic that comes up a lot in our community calls and sessions with clients. So, to give a little bit of context, this month in our Intimacy Oasis, we're working with the topic equanimity. Now, there's a few things that come up when we speak about equanimity that are, well, first of all, the opposite of equanimity, which is reactivity. And then with reactivity comes triggers. With triggers often arises the topic of boundaries. So today, rather than going directly to the medicine, which is equanimity, we're going to go through, I'm bumping my microphone here. We're going to go through the exploration of reactivity, triggers, and boundaries. So, first of all, let's start, Rod, by having you describe what is a trigger.
Mm. That's a great question.
It gets used a lot, and sometimes I think it's used appropriately and sometimes inappropriately. So, let's really break it down.
Well, I guess we should start with what it's not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go for
And
it.
so, most often, what I see is when someone's triggered is a belief that somebody else is doing something wrong and that they need to change that behavior so that the person being triggered, feel different. Which, when I explain it like that, just seems really unreasonable. We should just stop there.
Podcast done.
Podcast done. I had a win. And so clearly that's not it. And so in many ways, and not everyone will have spent time around rifles. I did on and off when I was younger. But it's really similar to a rifle in that you can pull the trigger on a rifle. Nothing will happen. Nothing. Unless you stock it full of ammunition and you cock it. Then when you pull the trigger, it goes bang. And so a lot of people feel triggered when they go bang. But what it's highlighting is that, their body, their gun, if you like, is loaded and it's full of charge and it's ready to go off. And so really what's happening when a trigger is present is if I'm triggered, there's something in me that I need to address. There's something that I need to feel or look at or be with in some ways that allows something to change in my body, the relationship specifically to whatever feeling that is arising in that moment, not the other person. Now, this doesn't mean that what the other person is saying or doing is right. Doesn't need any adjustment, is perfectly correct. That's not it at all. The deepest truth is that whatever that person is saying, doing, or being, well, that's their work. It has nothing to do with me. It's not for me to impose my will, value system, belief structure upon another person. They're free to choose to believe, do, be, speak in any way that they feel or deem appropriate. And so knowing that they're a free and autonomous being, then that can only bring my attention back to me. There's something that I need to look at in this situation in relationship to whatever the topic is at that time that's active in my body. And one of the things that happens for me when I'm triggered is quite often I'll overreact. And that's a really interesting experience to be the one overreacting or to have someone overreacting in front of me to something I've said or done and see a massive explosion. I've been the one that has exploded. I've created some amazing explosions through unskillful use of language. But in that moment of overreaction, when someone says or does something and I feel triggered, because of the way that the body relates to emotional experiences, something really specific happens in that moment. And so if something happens where I'm triggered, what's actually triggered, as I spoke to before, was whatever that charge is that's stored in the body. And so that charge is going to be a series of feelings that haven't been felt. So they become stored emotions in the body. And the body, in many ways, behaves similar to a hard drive. It stores emotional feelings in the body. So when an emotion arises, there's always this sense that they're coming from down up. They're actually on their way out of the body at that moment. And so if for some reason I don't fully feel everything that's available and I just feel part of it and then react, so the moment I react, I'm no longer feeling. So it means I'm only feeling a certain amount of whatever's arising, and then I'm reacting, doing, being, saying, speaking, whatever I'm doing. So anything that's not fully felt will stay stored in the body. It will also rise again to be felt because it wants to leave the body. It wants to be liberated. It wants to be let go of. And so every time I don't feel it, it's pressed down in the body, pressed down in the body. And eventually it starts to drive my behavior because if I don't want to feel that feeling, then I have to behave in ways that avoid it. So now not only am I not feeling these feelings in my body, but they're directing my behavior, my who I am and who I'm being. There's quite a lot of talk about being our authentic self. There's nothing that can be authentic if I'm avoiding something because it's not an authentic choice. It's a choice being made out of, I don't want to feel this, so I'm going to do this. That's not authentic choice. There's no choice in that. It's like I have to do this thing if I don't want to feel that. There is no choice. So it's like being trapped. It just builds and adds to the pressure. And so as these feelings get stored in the body, as soon as there's an avenue or a pathway out for those feelings, they all come flooding up at once. They all dive through that open pathway, if that makes sense. Bear with me, I'm not well. So the moment that that opening presents itself, which is the person saying, doing, or being the thing, whatever, another way of looking at triggered is when a person behaves in X, Y, Z way, these feelings arise in my body. That's probably a more accurate description rather than going, this person's triggered me. It's more like when somebody displays these qualities, these feelings arise in my body.
Well, let's use a real life example there. So one of my shadow or not so shadow is like to be controlling. So if I'm being controlling towards you, what happens in your body?
These days, relief. It's like, oh, you want to do everything and run everything? Go for it. I'm going to do nothing.
Yeah. So if we rewind time a few years,
yeah,
and if we go back in time and I'm being controlling, what would happen in your body?
I would immediately tighten the front of my body. I would feel trapped, resentful, worthless, powerless, not good enough. And I would want to react strongly to that. So it would create a really strong reaction in the body that, like for me, your powerlessness, worthlessness, not good enough, those types of feelings have always been like a trigger for anger. So how I would habitually react would be angrily to those experiences, to that desire to control. Yeah.
And so how has that changed from the habitual reaction you had a few years ago to where you are now? Can you describe what your journey has been through that to where you are now? Like as if you're creating a map for someone.
Yeah, that it's such a hard journey and it's not linear. So I just want to point that out. Well, I don't know when, but I realized at some point that, in life, the things that made me angry were all things that I did. Like I was young, like I'm talking 19, 20. And so I had a practice already of recognizing that, if I was angry at something or someone, the practice was, where in my life do I do that thing? I would call it same shit, different shovel. So I wouldn't do it in exactly the same way that person was doing it. So, initially in my body, in my awareness, I'd be like, oh, well, I don't do that. I am so good. That was the feeling. Like my ego was,
such a rush, isn't it?
It is. My superiority, got to work out. And it's great big self-esteem, ego prompts like, how cool am I? I don't do that. And so I'd really enjoy that feeling. And I'm really enjoying reminiscing about it now. I guess I still do that. I forgot what the question was. I got so into that.
The question was, how did you go from that highly reactive, loaded place to now being able to?
So the initial foundation for me was that practice.
Yes.
It was like looking for how I did the thing that made me angry.
Yeah.
And so somewhere along the line, I realized that everything that activated something in my body was something that I already did, but I wasn't aware of, which is really what, for me was what pointed my attention to the irritation in my body around it. The irritation and the anger and the frustration wasn't actually at the other person. It was that I did this thing and I couldn't see it. It's like, oh my God. But I couldn't attribute it to that. It was always attributed to the other person. I projected it outwards towards them. So they were the person causing the irritation, not the fact that, oh, this is something I do that I actually don't want to do. It's against my values, who I want to be, where I want to go, what I want to create in the world. This is not a part of that.
Yeah, so it presents an opportunity for healing. It's like part of your own inner being going, hey, look down here at this thing you don't want to see.
Yeah, and not knowing that it was a thing to look at was really confusing. So it was like there was no one having the conversation. So I just had to find my way through it. And so that's what I did. And so that was probably the first part of the step, but that's incomplete. In some ways, it's a deeper form of torture.
Yes.
Because now I'm aware that I shouldn't be angry because of this thing, because I'm doing whatever that thing is somewhere in my life. And sometimes I couldn't find it. Sometimes I just didn't want to. And so then the irritation is actually greater at that point. So the awareness creates a deeper, further irritation to the system. And again, it's the desire to be free of that irritation. So the irritation started to build. So I became more aware, not decrease. And so I knew there was more work to do. And so in lots of ways, like I was blessed because I ended up with a meditation practice, which is not a snowball's chance in hell that I would have cultivated on my own. Like as a younger man, having ADHD, dyslexia, being fully hyperactive extrovert, just to get me to sit still during a movie was it was impossible. Ask my parents. I didn't sit still as a kid at all. Even when I sleep, I toss and turn. So there was not something I was ever going to do. But one of my teachers wanted me to be a part of a men's group at some point. And I was like, shit, my teacher's asked me to be a part of this men's group. I need to show up. So then my meditation practice got really serious. And in some ways, that was the beginning of that, like the extension of that awareness was that by meditating, it created a spaciousness in my awareness, in my being, in my thoughts, my feelings. Really, it starts out really small. One of my teachers used to say there was 0.3 of a second before the terrorists take the building. And what he meant by that was that there's 0.3 of a second in a moment before I react and before I become unconscious. So the terrorist taking the building is me becoming unconscious and immersing in my reactivity and the desire to react, which is so seductive, but we'll get into that. It's such a delicious, being reactive and indulgent in my own emotional experience is so seductive. It's so desirous. It's I don't know, it just sits there so dark and naughty.
It feels like it's kind of
beautiful.
it's hand in hand with that superiority part as well. It's like that
Yeah.
desire to, from inside of me, I can feel how the desire to react. It's like to make myself bigger, more important, special. Like,
Yeah.
it's like something's being done to me and I've like got to
Justified violence.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
like
it's
gives me a
like,
reason to roar or to hide or to
yeah.
be a victim, to make somebody else wrong.
Yeah, being a victim I find really seductive. I feel the part of me that just loves it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Poor me. And I can be the biggest persecutor at all. And a great rescuer. I just move around, and whichever one is, feeling good on the day.
Yeah.
And they're all good things to notice.
Mm.
And so that spaciousness that opened up through meditation gave me, in that 0.3 of a second, it gave me a moment to catch what I was about to do. So I've gone from not being aware that I'm reactive, thinking it's justified and reasonable for me to react, to becoming aware that I react and that it's actually not my place to blame the person, but there's work for me to do, all post experience, to now actually having the spaciousness in the moment to catch that I'm about to say or do something that's totally out of alignment with what I believe, my values, who I am, who I want to become, all these things. And so that spaciousness in that moment allowed me to start to catch those moments of that seductive reactivity that we spoke about. And there was never, like, in quite often, there was no desire in my body to actually want to not do the reactive behavior in the moment. Like, it doesn't feel authentic to actually want to not do it because it's so seductive. The desire is so intoxicating and strong and alluring. There was no part of me that didn't want to indulge in that. And so it was really hard then, from going from being aware post activity to becoming aware in the moment, to actually finding the desire to actually do something different. Because it felt like in my body that in that moment that I didn't actually want to. So somewhere along the line, I realized that what I want and don't want in life actually isn't that valuable to me. So the like getting what I want is a good thing. It's a fun thing, but never ever has it brought any lifelong fulfillment. No part of me feels completely satiated by anything that I've gotten in my life to this point, where I could just go, oh, I earned this much money, I bought this thing, I got this, I did that. No one thing could I go, yeah, right, I could die complete right now. So there was a realization at some point that, getting what I want really doesn't mean anything. And I do have my own inquiry around that, which I'm open to sharing, but I don't want to derail the conversation.
Feels a little bit of a sidestep. So
yeah, it'll go too wide.
Back to the reactivity specifically.
So that awareness, that spaciousness, I could start to catch myself, and then I'd still do the reactive thing, because I couldn't feel that desire, that want to actually, be conscious in that moment. And it wasn't there. There was no pull. There was no desire for it. And it took years of getting absolutely sick of the post-incident shame, guilt, remorse, hurt that I'd created, hurt that I felt, sadness that I'd created, sadness that I felt, the regret, just all those feelings of just being like, oh my God, I am so sick of creating the same situation. Just like, it took that. And even then, in the moment, I still didn't feel the desire or the want to do something different. And so then, knowing that what I wanted didn't mean anything and that I was catching this moment. At some point, that regret, that being sick of it, the shame, the guilt, the feelings that came afterwards, I just decided to, like, I don't know, but it kind of felt like this. I know some people are listening and not watching, but it's kind of felt like I was going like my face is all screwed up and tense, and I'm like, I'm gonna just do this thing or say this thing. So, like, you would be saying or doing something. That I remember the moment. I remember one moment anyway. It was in the kitchen, and you were saying something, and I was just like, my body was just losing its fucking mind. It was just like, and I was like sitting there going,
face screwed up, fingers
screwed
like
up,
claws,
just like tense and tight, and going, and how do you feel about that? Oh, I love you. It came out something like this.
Yes.
So it wasn't skillful or beautiful in any way. But what it did do was create something different in the moment. Regardless of how it felt inside, it came across with enough curiosity, compassion, love, and trustability that it stopped whatever was happening and brought us into a different moment together.
Yes. Created connection. And I don't specifically remember the moment, but I can.
No, you wouldn't, because it was happening inside.
I can feel how it interrupted a pattern.
Yeah. So
that was going on.
Instead of walking down the same spiral staircase together, I stopped.
Yes.
And in that moment, just me doing something different changes everything. And so in that moment, you responded differently.
Yes.
And we didn't go to the same place, and the same thing didn't happen. And there was so much relief in my nervous system. Like, oh my God, I finally did the thing. And I finally didn't do the other thing. It's just like, oh my God, it felt delicious.
Yeah. Just to make that specific for people listening, when you say I finally did the thing and I didn't do the other thing,
right.
can you say that sentence in full?
So when I say I finally did the thing, like whenever I would, posthumously diagnose and break down and analyze what I'd done and where I was and what I needed to shift or change, when I say I finally did the thing, I finally did what I realized I always needed to do, which was interrupt that pattern, not react to what I was feeling in my body, allow the feelings to be there, and allow my awareness to guide my choice. So what I mean is that the habit was to react. So I noticed the habit, caught the habit, didn't react, didn't choose so much from desire, but chose from a place of awareness of like, in this situation, this is the man that I want to be.
Yes.
This is the thing that I want to do in these moments when it's uncomfortable, when I'm hurting, I'm scared, I'm vulnerable, I feel powerless, I'm triggered to the hilt. I want to be able to go, hey, tell me more about this. What's happening for you? Like, talk to me, show me what's happening. Like, to actually stay with the discomfort, the feelings, like feeling all of them in my body, the hurt, the pain, the vulnerability, being scared, not knowing what's happening, powerless, worthless, activated, triggered, angered, frustrated, hurt, scared, feeling all of that, and then going, okay, that's all happening, and curious what's happening for you. Like, so that's what I mean by that one. The other one was I didn't do the thing I didn't want, which is I didn't go into reactivity. I didn't do my habitual thing that I've trained myself to do throughout my life, which I learned unconsciously at some point, was that, somewhere along the line, I found permission to be reactive. And life gives us heaps of opportunities for that, because culturally, to react to your emotions is somehow viewed as a good thing right now in our culture. I think in the future they'll look back at this time and look at the reactivity and the things that, especially if you look at social media or the internet, like there's so much permission there for people to be reactive. And because of the anonymity and you know what I mean, being anonymous,
yes,
people really engaged with that because they aren't being seen. And in some ways that's a really beautiful thing, because that reactivity that was always inside. Now it's giving it permission. It's bringing something from the darkness out into the light. But people have now taken that from the internet where they're anonymous. It's given them permission to be reactivity in their reactive in their daily life. Daily life's deteriorating for a lot of people really rapidly. There's a strong relationship between their permission to be reactive, their relationship to their own reactivity, the value and the meaning that they think that it has versus its reality, and how that all impacts their life. And so the reactivity is a potent, intoxicating, delicious darkness that can invisibly permeate and ruin our lives.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean when I didn't do the thing I didn't want and I did the thing that I did want. That's what I mean by that.
Yeah. So that's essentially the roadmap. It's like recognizing the thing that's being activated in the body and then being able to make different choices is essentially what you're describing.
Yeah. And the hardest part is that people value what they want so much and think it's so important, you know, that I want to say this right now. I want my feelings heard right now. I want to react to this right now. Thinking that what we want is important is really dangerous in that way because it gives us so much permission to go down that road of reactivity. Whereas in that moment when I made that choice, there was no feeling in my body that I want to do this. So there was no feeling in here coming out going, I want this, I desire this, like I have to have this thing. But there was this awareness which felt really subtle and soft and wide. And in that, it doesn't feel like the desire, but there feels like it's almost like it's finally time to embrace this. It's so subtle and so gentle. There's no desire to grab at. There's no force to push away from. There's just an availability. There's an awareness that there's a different way available, but I have to choose it.
Yeah.
And no part of me will ever want to. And that's the part I find the hardest to get across to people is that you can't choose this based on what you want. You have to choose it based on what you know will create the outcome that you want.
Yeah.
Like in business, people won't go, well, I'm just going to go into this meeting and I'm just going to say whatever I feel. They realize that if they want a certain outcome, there's certain steps that will produce that outcome and there's other steps that won't. In intimate relationship and in how we're being in the world, it's the same. There's certain ways of being that will create certain outcomes and there's certain ways of being that will not create those outcomes. So taking that intentionality into our daily interaction with the world and our relationship to the world, ourselves, the people around us, our relationship to our feelings is really important to have that level of awareness to be able to start to consciously relate with those aspects of our being.
Yeah. How it feels to me, it's almost like making a choice from consciousness rather than the animal instinct of the body, because the animal instinct of the body feels like it's going to go into the reaction, the habit of the past, whereas consciousness is the pathway for the new step forward.
Yeah. Like if you train a dog to attack, it'll attack. And the body's an animal. Train it to attack when someone says X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
It'll attack when people say X, Y, Z. But it also learns fast.
Yes.
So we can train it different ways. So once I'd had that experience, then that desire did start to come online. Like the want for that again. Like it wasn't until my body had an experience to recognize the resonance of that vibration of how it felt. It was all conceptual before that.
Yeah.
But to have the experience, the desire did come online.
Yes.
But the desire that came on was curiosity. It's like, oh, all these feelings are happening in my body. I'm curious. What's happening for you right now?
Yes.
The curiosity seems to be the medicine that melts all of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd like to just tease apart reactivity a little bit more because I know your experience of reactivity is explosion and anger. But at some point, what was important for me was to recognize that in my desire to freeze or my desire to run away or avoid something, that too is reactivity. And I think it's common that the person who's being angry looks like they're the one doing something wrong or, upsetting intimacy. But I had to take responsibility for the ways I was destroying intimacy through freezing or running away or avoiding discomfort. And I think that form of reactivity is not as commonly explored. The other thing, when I would freeze or run away, and it can still happen, but one of the ways I identify that I'm in that place is that my mind will be looping. There'll be a sense of like, he said this, he did this, he should have done this, he should have done that. It's like, the mind gets really busy when I'm in that reactive mode of avoiding feeling something, avoiding being present to intimacy, wanting to freeze and run and hide. And I think that it's important for people to understand that reactivity has, a range of different flavors.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is easy to point the finger at the loud, explosive one.
Yeah.
But it's not always necessarily the most destructive. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Quiet coldness and the turning away that happens inwardly for someone who's timid or quiet, it creates devastation. Like internally for them, the isolation and aloneness, but also for the isolation and aloneness that it creates for their intimate partner.
Yeah. So just wanted to include that in the exploration of reactivity, because reactivity has a lot of different flavors. And I know for me, in some ways, even pointing the finger towards you for being explosive and angry gave me further place to hide. It's like it increased my capacity for
Justified
hiding.
violence.
Yeah, exactly. So that in the freezing and hiding, that's its own form of violence. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. To isolate another person when they desire intimacy is to give them the opposite of what they want. It's violent. It cuts them off from their source. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've explored triggers, we've explored reactivity. You've referenced projections, but you didn't call it a projection. So I'd like to tease that out a bit more, because I see projections as being a common source of conflict in intimate relationships. So let's give it that title, projection, so that, because people will go, oh, I've heard that. So can you say a bit more specifically what projection means?
Yeah, projection is a real gift in a lot of ways to the person projecting. Yeah, it's in some ways the human organism, as much as we're a social being and that we need tribe and groups and people, there is the capacity to function autonomously. And for me, part of how that functioning autonomously can happen is through projection. Projections show me the parts of me that I can't see. So they're the parts of me that are unconscious. But as soon as I project them out or can see them in another person, I have the opportunity then to see that in myself. But without that mechanism inside this human body, then I don't have that opportunity. But as long as I hold on to the belief that projections are about other people, and projections are of no service to me, and I become a self-righteous, dominating, controlling human running around telling everyone how to be in the world. I've done my share of that. I can feel it in my body.
So projections create separation and
they create separation
when they're not acknowledged.
Yeah, it's not dissimilar to isolation and aloneness. It creates a form of that because if I'm to look out into the world and go, this person's doing this and this person's doing that and they're doing this and they're doing that and they're all wrong and they need to change, like I'm now isolated all those people. I'm now alone in this bubble of perfection that I've
illusory bubble of perfection.
That was I was trying to work out where to put the illusion in, and I missed the opportunity. I was too excited. I'm in my illusionary bubble of perfection, and the whole world around me is wrong and shit and needs to change in so many ways. And this is where this work gets tricky. Those things that we're seeing will be true.
I've got a great quote for this.
Sure.
So the quote is, if I say to you, your hair's on fire, and you turn around and say to me, that's a projection, that may well be true, but your hair's still on fire. So, yeah, the fact that it can work both ways.
Yeah. And so, yeah, where I was going was that whatever it is that we're projecting out will most likely be true. And this is where it gets confusing. So people recognize the truth. They feel it. Even the person being projected on will feel the truth of what's being shared. But quite often we treat the truth as a goal, which means if we've reached the truth, we've reached the pinnacle of this conversation and what's happening. And that's actually not true. The truth changes with the more aware we become. The more aware we become, the more different viewpoints we can see, the more diluted the truth becomes, because the truth becomes all those points of view. They're all true depending on where you stand, what your experience has been in the world, how wide your awareness is, determines how much you can see of the truth in any moment. And so, being that those things are true, the conversation also stops there. But if I inquire as to what if it's also true that I do all those things, how will that change? Because them changing all those things won't change my life experience at all, or how aware or awake I am.
Yes.
Whereas if I take that as, yes, that might be true about those people, but how is all that true about me, and what can I do with that information? How can I use that information to curate a different version of who I want to become in the world and become a greater, more loving being of greater service to the people around me? So recognizing that as truth, but then looking for how it's true in me, then how is it true in other spaces of my life? Like, how do I do those same things in all the areas? Or like, how do I do it in, intimate relationship, friends, hobbies, like as a parent, as a man, as a whatever. So there's so many layers through which we can begin to view this so-called truth through. And so depending upon how aware we are will depend on how much we can see. The more narrow my vision, the more I want other people to be wrong and me to be right, then that's all I'll see. My exploration of the truth stops there in that moment of projection. But if I'm willing to accept that, my projections are trying to show me the parts of me that I can't see, now my projection becomes a tool, not just a weapon. Because before throwing it out, it's a weapon. But now it's a tool. So rather than destroy, I want to build something. It's like a hammer. A hammer's a great tool. It's great for building houses, great for hammering nails, but don't try and fix your car with the hammer. Okay? Things are going to go sideways really quick. And so here's this hammer of projection that I'm throwing out into the world. It's quite a violent thing to do. They're dangerous. But now it's like, well, hang on, what can I build with this? What can I build with this awareness? So using projection becomes not so much a problem or something to stop doing as something to become aware of. It's like, okay, I'm a person. I project onto others. Awesome. Right. What can I do with that? Okay. Notice when I'm projecting onto others. It's the only thing I have to do. Don't have to fix it. I don't have to change who I am. There's nothing wrong with me. Notice that I'm projecting onto others. Catch when I do. It's like, so what else is true here? I'm projecting right now. I'm trying to show myself something. It's like, shit, I need to pay attention to this. And it's always something that's impacting my whole life at that moment.
Can you give one or two examples in case people are not 100% sure on how a projection shows up for them?
Yeah. Okay, my favorite one is slow drivers in the right lane. Or if you're in America or overseas, slow drivers in the left lane. Just slow drivers in the fast lane. As far as I'm concerned, Fast lane's my lane. So I will quite often get stuck behind a slow driver in the fast lane. The first thing that comes up is like, what is this mindless fucking twit doing? Just sitting there in the right lane, not present at all, totally off with the fairies, whatever my mind story is that I'm creating about what this person's doing or experiencing in that moment, vomiting that out my mouth at the same time. Quite often I'll catch myself. Well, it took me a really long time to catch that one because that's one I gave myself the most permission for. But what I realized was, it's like, okay, right. So first thing that came up was like all that anger was I felt trapped behind that person.
Mm-hmm.
I felt vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
I felt held back. I felt weak. I felt powerless. I couldn't do anything. And I felt stuck. There was this sense of that this person was holding me back in where I was going, what I was doing in my life through their lack of awareness. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay, yeah, I've been hurt so many times in my life through people not being present. I've hurt so many people in my life through not being present. It's like, yeah, not being present causes so much pain. So originally what I would do is I was the guy that would bully people, sit right up their ass until they moved. When I was younger, I'd flash the lights and beat the horn until I found out it was illegal. So, they were my solutions to these things as a, 18, 20-year-old, 30, somewhere along there last week. No, somewhere along the line, what I realized was that I needed to start to, okay, so how am I not being present at the moment? It's like, oh, well, I'm not present to all these feelings that are arising in my body because all I'm present to is how, this person's doing this thing that's irritating me. But below the irritation was all these feelings. It's like, all right, I'm going to create space for these feelings. So then I'd actually slow the whole car down to 100 or 200 meters gap. So yards, if you're American, that I would give myself space and go, right, how do I feel now? It's like, whew, well, I don't feel trapped, which is good. And like now I'm being present. That person's not going to move. They're doing whatever they're doing that moment. Nothing to do with any of the stories I made up, but they're doing whatever they're doing. But then in that spaciousness, I also gave my feelings some space. Sat with like, oh, wow, that worthless feeling. Like I feel so vulnerable and small and unworthy in that. It's like, wow. So I just feel unworthy, feel small, and just allow those feelings to just to be present with them, to give them presence, to give them time and space and feel them until they started to move up my body. It would get more intense as it moved up my body. If I sat with it long enough, my body would soften. It's like, relief. Usually about that time, the person moves and I can get back to being on my way. But the medicine was that I was projecting out that person wasn't present, realizing how I wasn't present. It had nothing to do with being mindless while I was driving in that moment, but I wasn't present to the discomfort of uncomfortable feelings arising in my body. And when I gave them space too, what I realized was they were present in a lot of areas in my life at that time. The whole reason I was rushing in the first place was a reaction to all those feelings in my body. So I wasn't just projecting them out there. Like even being in a hurry and being disorganized was in many ways a projection of that internal experience.
Yeah, beautiful explanation. Thank you. Yeah. One of the ones I've been working with recently and have worked with on and off throughout my journey of awareness, but it feels like it's raw and present and alive again, is this part of me that can be critical. So, noticing other people being critical and then coming back to like, feeling the ways I can be critical with myself, with others, with you, and then getting present to what sits underneath that criticism is of course there's vulnerability, there's pain, there's discomfort, there's uncertainty, most of all it's vulnerability. And so the way that criticism has been used almost as a protective mechanism around that vulnerability. But of course, the criticism means I end up feeling more separate and more alone. So the medicine being to keep coming back to the vulnerability and loving myself through that place of when the protective mechanism of criticism arises, it's like, how do I come back to just softening in my body and being vulnerable?
Yeah, and vulnerability is an excruciating one. Like in my experience, it doesn't change. It just gets deeper, which feels the same. Does that make sense? It's like, oh, I feel so vulnerable in life and this and that. Be with the vulnerability, it finally shifts, only to recognize that there's this more subtle but deeper vulnerability that's just sitting there and it's just lurking.
Yes.
It was always there. I just didn't notice it.
Yeah,
but
totally.
It doesn't seem to change. The thing I've had to cultivate is just that willingness to be more vulnerable than I was a moment before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's like a rich life journey, I feel like, for that one. I don't think there's any end to pulling on that thread.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Just want to do a time check. Where are we? Okay, 46 minutes. We have time to explore boundaries.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Like, we've never actually set a time limit for our podcast, so I don't mind how long it goes for.
In my head, we have one.
All right, cool. I'm going to check in one day and find out what it is.
I'll tell you now so everyone knows.
All right. Joe Rogan always does 3 hours.
Yeah. That's why I don't watch Joe Rogan. So,
touche.
If I look up a podcast
Yeah.
and it's longer than an hour, it has to be someone I'm super, super invested in hearing from.
Oh, wow.
Whereas if there's a topic that I like and it goes for, anywhere up to an hour, I'm like, oh yeah, I can spend an hour on that topic. But if it's over an hour, I have to have a really high level of investment. So that's kind of the roundabout the marker for me.
Yeah. I don't have a time set, and I'm going to share why, because it's really quite funny. I don't listen to podcasts. I've been encouraged over the years to create one, primarily for my desire, love, and capacity for talking.
Yes.
And I have the capacity, the desire to listen, but I do that in my work. So it's like listening to podcasts. I don't know. It's just not a thing.
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, I don't have any preference for how long they are. As long if people are happy, then I'm happy. But yeah, we can. I know actually what I notice in workshops is 90 minutes is about the maximum for people to really be present.
That's true.
Yeah, and like even by the end of 90 minutes, it's waned depending on their experience of whatever the topic is. For some people, they go really deep. They're fried within 15, 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And if it's an easier journey, 90 minutes is easy, but depends on the topic. But go on.
Sweet.
What was the next thing? Because I don't feel like we've fully touched.
Oh, you don't feel like we're complete around triggers and projections and reactivity?
I'm not sure. Like, do you feel that we are? I feel like there was something else I wanted to share around triggers, but I can't remember what it was.
Okay, so maybe it'll arise when we talk about boundaries.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so can you describe what a boundary is?
Yeah. A boundary it's a self-imposed limit. A boundary is something that we place on ourselves, not on another person or their behavior. And that's a really important distinction. So if I have a boundary about how I'm willing to be spoken to, then that's not up to someone else to live up to. It's like if I say to you, I'm not going to be sworn at, that doesn't mean that you can't swear at me or that you shouldn't. And it doesn't mean that you should try and stop. It just means that if you swear, then I have an obligation to meet that boundary and that value in that moment and adjust how I'm being. So a boundary is something I impose on myself. So if you swore at me, if we were on the phone, I might hang up. I might, for it together, I might just say, I'm not willing to participate in a conversation where I'm being sworn at. So I'm going to remove myself from the conversation, but I'm happy to start it again at a at a later date, something, mutually agreeable in an hour,
Yeah.
not too long.
Yeah.
So I might do something like that.
So it's a sense of upholding yourself, what the thing is, rather than asking the other person to change.
I step up to my boundary. I step up to my values. I step forward and live in alignment with those boundaries. Their boundary is something that's there for me to live. My boundary, I should honor it.
Yes.
It's a boundary. Like, I remember, like, I had this like hammered home really strongly when I was a kid. It's like, if you say you're going to do something, you do it. You say you're not going to do it, you don't do it. Boundaries kind of like that. It's like, if I say that it's a boundary, then I have to be willing to do it, especially when no one's looking. If I go, oh, no one's looking, I can just get away with this, boom, there's poison in the pool of my own humanity right there. It's just from that moment forward, I'm screwed because I'm no longer choosing that what I believe is important enough for me to live to. I expect other people to, but I'm not willing to. Like, how gross is that?
Yeah.
So a boundary is something that I have to live day in, day out, no excuses. And it has to be imposed on me. The moment that my boundary influences your behavior, now I'm in a state of control. I'm controlling, manipulating the space, the people, you, whoever around me to behave in a way that I feel, is desired or safe. But whatever it is, it's like there's something in me that I don't want to feel. So I want everyone to behave this way. Even my desire isn't authentic. It's a reaction to avoiding a certain discomfort or feeling that I don't want to feel. And there's never been a law written anywhere in any of the religions that I haven't studied or any of the countries of the world. But there's no law anywhere that says that people should behave in a way that makes me feel good and that they should avoid behaving in ways that make me feel uncomfortable or unpleasant. So given that uncomfortable feelings, being in discomfort, feeling whatever horrible feeling is perfectly normal part of our humanity, then there's no requirement for people to behave in a way that helps me to avoid that. So knowing that these things are available and that it's okay to actually feel them, then it's up to me to live in alignment and relationship to those feelings, but not to impose that upon other people. Because once I want to avoid that feeling and I start controlling, that behavior seeps out in every area of life. When we're already that unconscious that we can't see that that's a problem, then it also gives it space to seep into our tone of voice, how we relate to people, how we speak to other people. The worst part is that we won't even know it's bad. And most people won't tell you. They'll talk about it behind your back. And so the person having the experience never gets to wake up to that part of them. So yeah, it's a real, boundaries they're a big topic, but they're a big thing and they're really misunderstood.
Yeah.
Quite often people will say, I won't be spoken to this way, so people can't speak to me that way. It's like, yeah, that's not a boundary, dude. That's control.
Yeah.
You're now little Hitler, trying to control, manipulate, and dominate.
So I know that one of the things that may come up for people listening to this is, what about in situations of abuse? How does a person uphold their own boundary and what they need if there's abuse happening in a relationship?
Yeah, abuse is a slightly different situation, but in some ways it's still the same. Like, if you don't want to be hit or don't want to be spoken to a certain way and somebody does that, it's up to you to get out of there.
Yeah.
Like, clearly that person is demonstrating their capacity for how they relate to their emotional experience, which means that when certain emotions arise, that person will respond with violence. Either that's how they've trained their nervous system or how their nervous system's been trained throughout the duration of their life, is that there's a physical response to certain emotions. And usually that violent response will shut down whatever is, whatever they don't want to feel in their body, whatever's stirring up that feeling, whatever behavior is stirring up that feeling, violence will have stopped it somewhere in the past. So all that's happening is that organism, that human, is repeating the behavior that's worked when they were younger. So they've been violent. So what they're showing in that moment is that their organism has been trained in this specific way, and unless they're consciously working on it, it's unlikely to stop at any point in time. Even if they are working on it, it's still so hard to change.
Yeah.
So you have to make a decision in that moment about whether or not you're going to keep putting yourself in that position. If you choose to re-engage in that relationship with a person that's violent, then you choose to accept that they will react violently when XYZ happens. And at that point, you'll have this same choice to make again. What do you do in that moment? Do you just walk out of the room? Do you want to stay in the relationship? Do you walk out of the house? Do you walk out of the relationship? Like, you need to make a choice at some point.
Yeah.
And that it's up to that person to honor that boundary, because that person, I know there's a real shaming of people that are violent in our relationship. In my experience, they're people that have been hurt by violence throughout their life. Their bodies have been trained in specific ways to react violently.
Yeah.
Not because they're stupid or dumb or unconscious, but just because if that's what you're showed when you're young, then you do not know any different. And most people, like we were talking about at the start, they'll be aware that that behavior is wrong. But then there's this gap between I'm aware that this is wrong, I'm aware that I should choose something different, and I have no capacity and ability to, and then I hate myself for it. It's the awareness. In some ways, it adds more weight to it.
Yes.
Being aware that it's wrong makes it harder to manage until there's some space to grab that moment. And then there's got to be an impulse and a desire, no different to what we spoke about earlier, to actually do it. But when we're that heated and we're that far down the road of loss of control, where we're about to become violent, it's already way too late for any of these things. There's too many things that need to happen before a person becomes violent from that person themselves, that checks that need to be in place. There's a whole heap of things that need to be in place for that person to check their own behavior, to check that with the person they're engaging with, for that situation to diffuse. And there's plenty of skillful ways that that can be done, but both partners need to be on board for that. So if you're in an abusive situation and your partner's not willing to do it, you've got some serious questions to face. Because if you're trying to journey that on your own, if your partner's reactive or violent and you're trying to solve it, that will never work, because you aren't the problem and you aren't them. Only they can fix their relationship to the feelings that are arising inside their body, and that's what they're reacting to, the feelings and discomfort. But no one, I don't know about you, but no one ever taught me how to feel a feeling. No one ever taught me how to feel emotions, what they mean, where they come from, how should I be with them. None of that stuff's discussed. None of that stuff's present in our culture. So these people are just reacting to intense discomfort in their bodies and don't actually know what to do with it.
So true.
And it's so sad, because it could be so different.
Definitely. Definitely. So
boundaries are something that somebody has to live up to themselves. Once they decide what a boundary is, it's up to them to honor that in all moments, not somebody else. Don't dump your work on someone else to do. Don't be lazy. Do it yourself. Like, if there's a boundary that you want to uphold, live it. Integrity.
Beautiful. So then coming to equanimity, which kind of equanimity is kind of the, as I said at the beginning, it's the topic we're exploring this month in Intimacy Oasis, and it's the space in which the triggers, the projections, the boundary has kind of, those conversations have arisen from there. So can you describe what equanimity is?
Yeah, like if you look it up in the dictionary, it essentially means to be non-reactive in regards to whatever's arising. But there's a much deeper meaning, than, or explanation to me than that. But equanimity is our capacity to be with whatever's arising, whether it's arising in our own bodies, in our partner's body, in the moment, in the world around us. And this is the key bit, without needing it to be different. Now, how do we get to that? So equanimity has two specific qualities that are present with it. One is presence and one is sensitivity. Now, in lots of ways, those two grow hand in hand. So I gave an example earlier about being in the fast lane and then being stuck behind the dude. And so what I wasn't present to in those moments was my sensitivity, that there was feelings arising in that moment. So if I become, as I said, slow down, move into the other lane and just become present with those feelings and that sensitivity, what I notice is once I'm present with the feelings that are arising in my body, I'm automatically curious. Like presence has the quality of listening. It's like listening without, it's not just listening with our ears, but it's like listening with our whole body, listening with our emotions, listening with our mind, listening with our awareness. We're listening with all the layers of our humanity. And in that listening, we're completely available. So if I'm listening to someone, I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say next, because then I'm thinking, I'm no longer listening. So I'm no longer available. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to do. I'm not reacting. I'm not doing anything. I'm completely available for this human, this situation, these feelings, whatever it is that's arising. And so in the presence emerges the sensitivity. In the sensitivity invites presence. If we can stay with that process, automatically we have equanimity. Equanimity can't be cultivated. This is just my opinion, but in my opinion, equanimity can't be cultivated directly. If we step towards it, we push it away. Because if I'm trying to be equanimous, I'm already not in equanimity. Which means if I'm trying and I'm not, then all I'm going to do is keep repeating that process and put it away. Equanimity has to be hit at an angle. And what I mean by that is it's essentially a byproduct. Equanimity is a byproduct of awareness. The more aware I become, naturally the less reactive I become. Like an example we used earlier was that moment in the kitchen. Part of what happened in that moment, there was the desire not to feel all the horrible ways I had in the past about the regret and the whatever. There was no desire for the new behavior, but there was somewhere in that spaciousness. Oh, I forgot what I was going to say.
You were saying about it being an example of equanimity.
Oh, yeah. I was aware enough to know that I wanted something different. And so in that, aware enough to know that I wanted something different, but I was aware enough to know that if you were behaving in that way, that was whatever it was, I can't even remember, but the feeling I do remember, there was stuff coming towards me. So there might have been blame or judgment or criticism or something. But then somewhere in that awareness, like if she's behaving this way, how much is she hurting to be blaming and criticizing and judging and controlling? And it's like, okay. So I'm hurting, feeling trapped, vulnerable, wanting to react, no desire to just be curious, but then also this awareness of like, you're really hurting right now. I'm really hurting. Okay, I'm going to lean in and be curious about yours, about what's happening in your body. Why are you hurting so much that these patterns emerging of yours? And so having that level of awareness that you're hurting so much, that these unconscious patterns arisen, there was nothing for me to react to. Does that make sense? Because through awareness, I'd found equanimity, because instead of just reacting to the feelings in my body, reacting to the words that are being said, I didn't do that. I didn't say that. That's not what I meant. Rah, 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 rah. Instead of all of that, it's just like, you're hurting right now. What's happening for you? Tell me more about it. And what's happening now happened. You started to cry. But it created an invitation. So there was no, like from that point of view, there's no need to react. There's no need to do anything different. There's just, through awareness, equanimity starts to happen. Does that make sense? It's like, it's a combination of all these things, but it's only through meditation that I got still enough to increase my awareness, to notice there was more feelings to feel and sensitivity. And so it just builds over time. Like it's not, we are an organism, which means we change really slowly. It's so annoying. So we have to go through the fucking process. It's the only way to describe how it feels for me is slow. Because I like to move quickly. And so, yeah, but that slow unfurling of awareness allows all these little bridges to start to naturally occur. So equanimity is essentially presence and sensitivity, and through awareness allows those three to become equanimity, allows presence, sensitivity, and equanimity to be born through the awareness as a natural byproduct of that awareness. But again, as we become aware of something new, like the mind changes really quickly, the emotion changes quickly, but not as quick as the mind, and the body's the slowest. So, you know, in our culture, we do things backwards. People think changing their mind will somehow fundamentally change their life. It generally doesn't. We need to change the body. And so in that awareness, slowing my breathing down. So doing something physical is really important part of creating change, doing something different with my body. But in becoming aware, I was naturally slowing down my breath. I was naturally slowing down how I was speaking to people. And what this did is just created this sense of more space in my life. The more I slowed everything down, the more spaciousness there was, the less pressure there was. Well, the pressure sort of started to come off, but in that spaciousness, awareness got the opportunity to be realized. Yeah.
And you've referenced curiosity a few times. Was the choice to become more curious, was that deliberately cultivated, or does it feel like a byproduct of the increased awareness?
It's an intoxicating cocktail of all those things, but I'm a naturally very curious person. So in some ways, I'm kind of lucky or blessed to have that curiosity on board, because it's easy for me to be curious.
Yes.
Whereas for other people, it's much harder. So curiosity, like I love to learn, as you know, like, yeah, I won't go down that hole. I love to learn, and I love to inquire. I love being curious. So there's a large part of me that's naturally curious, but particularly about this work and all these things. So, you know, having my curiosity on them helps me to become aware of them for sure. Helps me to facilitate and lead and teach and do those types of things as well.
And being curious in the moment of conflict in a relationship.
That wasn't easy or natural. Like that was intentional.
Yeah.
There's a difference. It's like there was a recognition that if I'm only curious about my feelings, my experience, what's happening in my body, it's so self-centered that it excludes everybody else. It doesn't create anything good. And so, like, it was quite challenging to be curious. I think I described the
yes
at the time as like there was an awareness there to be curious, but it wasn't until I actually did it and had that whole thing unfold that it gave my nervous system something to relate to. It's not something we see in our culture.
Yeah.
We see unconscious relating, and we naturally mirror it.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we don't see a lot of conscious relating. So unfortunately, that doesn't get mirrored.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't easy to step into being curious in that way in that moment. But it was, I guess, some part of me that knew that if I wanted to grow in this way, and I wanted to, that I had to do something different. And the place to start was curiosity.
Yeah.
In lots of ways, it's always the first port of call. Because if I think I know what's happening in the moment, then I'm already not curious, and I already can't see what's happening beyond what I think I can see.
Yes.
So for me, curiosity in some ways is a spiritual practice of itself. It's like, what is happening in this moment, rather than, oh, this is happening. I know what this is. I'm going to react this way. I'm going to say these words. It's like, I wonder what's happening right now. And I've had some really intense moments where I've been challenged on that. I've gone, wow, this is happening. Interesting. I wonder where this is going. And so, yeah, being curious in some ways is a practice unto itself. But once I become curious about what is happening in my life, what is happening around me, what is happening in this moment,
Mm.
then I start to see things that I didn't see before.
Yeah.
And it all starts to open up.
Mm.
So in lots of ways, curiosity, yeah, it's a spiritual practice.
Mm.
Just being curious, especially about things that we know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially in the times where it feels challenging to be curious.
Yeah.
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 Or the times where hurt and pain is present.
Yeah. If I feel self-righteous in some way or justified or any of those sorts of things, they're red flags.
Yeah.
It's like those, what we would call normal moments of glory or greatness through our day are like red flags.
Yeah.
It's like, hang on.
Curious.
Ego's out of
Stop.
control. Yeah.
Go inside.
What aren't I seeing right now in this moment that I need to have a look at?
Mm.
Yeah.
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 Beautiful.
So curiosity separate to all those things, but also in some ways, it's like the thread that sews everything together.
Mm-hmm.
Curiosity is this really beautiful thing, and if we allow it to be cultivated,
Yeah.
and it feels to me like something that can be cultivated intentionally by people. It's not like a quality so much. Like it is curiosity is a quality, but it's also something that can be cultivated.
Yeah.
And so to be curious, it starts to open all the doors, and we can start to connect dots.
Yes.
That's my experience of it anyway.
Yeah. And people might even just have that in their awareness for the next time they're feeling hurt or in pain, just to be like, oh, I wonder what's going on for my partner. I wonder what's underneath this upset for me. I wonder what's underneath this upset for my partner. So that sense of, I wonder, being curious to go inside and have a look at what's there.
Yeah. I wouldn't leap straight to my partner.
No.
It's too big.
Yes.
There's too many layers within their own. Like, if I felt uncomfortable, I'd be curious about those feelings. I'd be curious what's under them.
Yes.
Because there's always something under a feeling. So, or an impulse to react in a particular way. Feel down through those. Be curious about what's happening in the body. I'd then let it spread to what's happening in this moment. And then if you can do that, then lean over to wonder what's happening for my partner.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to spiritual bypass and all these things.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we missed in triggers and equanimity.
Okay, sure.
One of the things with equanimity, if we try and cultivate it directly, is we'll almost inevitably spiritual bypass. That part where I said, if I'm trying to be in equanimity and I'm not, that moment always leads to some kind of spiritual bypass, which is the avoidance of some feeling or discomfort that's arising. And we don't want to react to that feeling or discomfort, but we do want to notice it, allow it to be there. It's part of the truth of our heart. It needs to be revealed. It needs to be felt. It needs to be allowed in that moment. So equanimity, like if you see someone who's equanimous in equanimity, so chaos is all around them, the shit's hitting the fan, and they're in a state of presence, they're sensitive, they're not stoic, whereas stoic is kind of like, I'm here and I'm not reacting, but I'm not feeling anything. I'm checked out. There's a checking out detachment in stoic. There's something in that feels really off for me.
Yeah.
And I can see why people would want to cultivate that, but it's nowhere near as, it's so dry and barren and empty compared to allowing the presence of sensitivity. And so in that that deep presence and that deep sensitivity and that feeling, not avoiding any of it, allowing all of it, and still not responding. Whereas the moment I go, oh God, that hurts, but I just want to be here for this person, I'll come back to that later. Stay there. Now I've spiritual bypassed.
Yes.
So now I've done it once, it's going to happen again, and it's going to get bigger. And it's going to create bigger impacts and bigger outcomes. But the moment I skip over that feeling and ignore that feeling in my own body, I'm also tolerating how that person's being. Now, tolerating breeds resentment. So now, as well as spiritual bypassing, I have resentment building in my body. Now, resentment is a real interesting one because it kind of poisons how we're being in the world. Because resentment is one of those ones that sits there so quietly and is often so justifiable. We don't recognize that it's poisoning how we speak to people, the tone of voice, our intolerance, how short and sharp we get, how aggressive we're being. People who have a lot of resentment in their body are really reactive and harsh and critical and judgmental and like you can really see it in, especially in intimate relationships where two people have been tolerating each other for years, the bickering.
Yes.
That's a good example of resentment.
Yeah.
Just seeping out in their
Every
day-to-day.
little thing is like
pick, pick. Yeah, that's when there's like a deep pool of resentment. But resentment poisons the pool of intimacy. Yes. Always. And so we want to be really aware of like trying to cultivate equanimity directly will almost inevitably always end up in some form of spiritual bypass, breeding some kind of resentment, which then goes on to poison the intimacy in many ways in the exact way that we didn't want to poison it in the first place. So it seems that it's very difficult to allow the intensity of our hurt and pain and discomfort, vulnerability, rawness to be online and still be available for love. And in lots of ways, that's what we're practicing here. Yeah. Equanimity, that, you know, allowing the moment to be exactly as it is without needing it to be different, has its roots in unconditional love. And so we spoke a bit about this in the men's group in Intimacy Oasis the other night, and one of the men brought it. The description that we use for unconditional love is the radical acceptance of the person, place, or moment exactly as it is without needing it to be different. Notice the parallel with equanimity?
Totally.
Yeah. So in some ways, being in a state of equanimity is being in a state of unconditional love, which is why it's so potent. So unconditional love in many ways is presence and sensitivity. And so when we talk about unconditional love, another way of saying it is love without conditions. And what that means then is very different to unconditional love. Love without conditions means that even though, you know, you're saying X, Y, Z and being X, Y, Z, I'm not going to use those as a condition to withdraw my love and bring forward my anger. I'm going to love you unconditionally and say, in this condition, I love you. When you're critical or angry or frustrated or hurtful, I still have love available for you. And that's a very different experience. But in many ways, being in equanimity is residing, or in some ways becoming, the state of unconditional love, which has its roots in allowing and acceptance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Delicious, delicious. And I know, can feel in my body the medicine that comes with that. The times when if I'm, you know, feeling messy or critical or judgy or demanding, and I experience you loving me through that, it's like, oh my God, feels so deeply healing, so touching, so it provides something that in that moment I don't have access to. It's like you're bringing a medicine that feels like it's separate from where I am in that moment, but it's the exact medicine that's needed.
Yeah. And in some ways, like we touched on this in the Intimacy Oasis call. I mean, whatever the call was that we did the other
community call on Sunday. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like love is healing and intimate relationships can be healing. But remember, like, you know, if you're healing from breaking your arm or your leg, it hurts like hell. Yeah. Healing is, you know, recovering from a wound, some kind of injury or hurt or pain. And there's quite often, and what I would call an unconscious belief, which just means something that people are unaware of, myself included. I've always like treated intimate relationship as like some kind of refuge. It's like, oh, when I have a relationship, I'll be happy. When I meet the woman of my dreams, then somehow I'll be fulfilled and we can go about our life and create it together and it'll just be beautiful. You know, I'm Disney. The thing is, that's not true. Relationships aren't a refuge. They're not a refuge from the world. They're not a safe haven for us to go to. They are. There's a safe haven for the person for us to take our feelings and wounds and hurts and pains too. But in many ways, intimate relationship is to reveal the places where we are not awake, where we're unconscious, to reveal the things we can't see. There's a reason our intimate partner can just naturally press our buttons without even thinking about it. Just like go, I'm going to say this way.
Ouch.
And it's like, ka-ching. And so in many ways, the whole point of intimate relationship is to heal the wounds that we don't know we have, you know, from our childhood, from our life, or our lineage, for other humans. Like the intimate relationship space is a place where healing does take place, but it's a place where the most hurt and pain will come alive in our bodies, and our partners will evoke that so that it can leave our bodies and leave us whole and feeling at home in our humanity and instead of feeling home because of somebody else.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think understanding that is it's a very important part of engaging in intimate relationship, knowing that you will be triggered, that you will be activated, that you will need boundaries, that you are going to get hurt.
Projections will happen.
Projections will
Pain
happen.
will happen.
Trust will be broken. Love will be broken. But it's up to us to learn, how do we build bridges to trust and love?
Yeah.
How do we come back to it? Because it's always going to be broken. Life will break it. Other people will break it. We will break it. Breaking it doesn't matter as much as our capacity to rebuild back to it. If we only look to avoid having it broken, that's not the actual work. The real work is like, how do I build the connections back so that it doesn't matter if they're broken 100 times, 1,000 times. But I find that learning to build the bridges is the medicine for them to not get broken in the first place.
Yeah, totally. Feels like we've covered a lot of ground in this episode with triggers, reactivity, boundaries, projections, equanimity, curiosity. If I could sum it up in this moment, and it won't be encapsulate everything, but the thing that's here that I would want to leave as a message for people is just to slow down, to breathe, and to feel. That feels to me like the first step. Do you have anything as a last message you'd like to leave for people?
No, that feels good. I think if I was to leave a message, I'd actually say, like, there's going to be things that we haven't covered.
Yeah.
It's impossible to nail all these things in like an hour or so. So I would say leave a question, and so that we can create a follow-on to this podcast and touch anything that we haven't touched.
Beautiful.
And while you're doing it, breathe and slow down.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us for this episode, and we look forward to hearing from you in the comments.
And before we go to the comments, it's 1 hour, 22 and 50 seconds. What's the time that we have for our podcast? I still don't know.
Oh, I thought I was clear when I made the 1 hour reference.
Oh, it's 1 hour, is it?
That was the past idea in my mind. It looks like we've shattered that today. So let's see what the feedback is on this episode.
No one's going to listen. Just be us.
I hope that there's some people who are actually invested in hearing from us.
I hope they're not all like me and don't listen to podcasts. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.